I want to move on to our next presenter, and we keep on the topic on the grazing. Seth will talk about regenerative grazing for carbon sequestration on grassland. And Seth, once again, it would be great if you could introduce yourself, maybe also your role during the UN Food System Summit. So that's how we got in contact. And I want to ask you to share your presentation now.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Martina, for having me here. I'll share the presentation as soon as I do the brief introduction. First of all, I just want to say it's an honor to be presenting to this group. And I've really enjoyed the conversations that I've heard before, and I hope that my presentation will add to the intellectual environment here. And I met Martina through the UN Food System Summit, and there were a variety of different tracks, I guess. They were called clusters, and there was some on grassland, some on soil, and some on livestock. And it's sort of interesting that those were all separate. From my point of view, it's all one thing. And subsequently, these groups have continued, and that's how we continue to know each other. So the Food System Summit was a great opportunity to get new people to know each other. And my organization is Soil4Climate. I co-founded that with my colleague, Carl Tiedemann, who's watching today. And our goal is to advance the science, policies, and practices of soil restoration as a climate solution. So that's our very specific focus. And it happens to be that grazing is a major part of that. And so that's just why we're sort of eyeball deep in that space and in that science. So I will share the screen now and get started, yes? So Martina, will you just confirm for me that you're seeing the screen?
Yes, full screen, all fine.
Okay, great, okay. So I'm calling it Sequestering Carbon in Grasslands, the Role of Ruminants. And of course, as this group knows, grasslands are really the dominant terrestrial ecosystem. They cover more land mass than any other ecosystem type. And of course, this includes the totality of what we call grasslands, which is also rangelands, pasture, and now a good deal of croplands is former grasslands. And then there's semi-desert, even desert, which were also former grasslands. So that whole terrain around the world of sort of minimal to moderate rainfall, getting up to around 1,000 millimeters per year is some type of grassland ecosystem that also co-evolved with a dominant megafauna grazer, a ruminant ungulate of some type. And so let's go on. And then, oops, I missed a slide. Yes, okay, so this is a slide. From White et al., lots of people cite her. Grasslands cover 40% of the landed surface of the earth and have 35% of the terrestrial carbon. And how come it's not advancing? Hang on one second. Okay, I'm having a problem with advancing it. All right, anyway, oh, good heavens. Oh, geez, here we go. All right, so this is from an exhibit called Exposed, The Secret Life of Roots from the US Botanical Garden. And these are actual grassland plants hanging in front of a cross-sectional photograph. But it really gets the point about the potential or the fact of the underground storage of carbon. And this is high organic matter soil, some of the best soils in the world, and that's where the carbon reservoir is. Now, if this exhibit were to be done again, I would advocate for there being pictures of animals up here, you know, with the grasses, grazing ruminants and other sundry creatures, because that's what makes the grasses thrive, as others here have already mentioned. This is from the Convention on Biodiversity 2016, which Martina linked to in the introduction and the announcement for this event. So I thought it would be good to draw from that. I know this is a nerdy slide, but basically, first of all, can people see the mouse when I move the mouse around? Can people see that? All right, so basically you have different ecosystem types, and then on the horizontal axis, you have the area in millions of square kilometers. And then on the vertical axis, you have the carbon storage in terms of tons per hectare. Okay, so clearly the most dense in terms of carbon is peatlands, but the largest area by far is grasslands and croplands. And when I do calculations, I just sort of put them together. I know that some percentage of croplands are former forests, but most are really former grassland. And also the reality is that these are the areas we have to work with. You know, we're not going to be working in peatlands, or we shouldn't be. We're not going to be working in tundra. We shouldn't be. Unfortunately, tropical rainforests are being cut down, but this is really where the game's going to be played. And then down here is the actual areas, and then the carbon storage per hectare. So this table just also reflects what's in the illustration above. In grasslands, you're looking at between 150 and 200 tons per hectare. It's just advancing on its own. That always happens to me. All right. So what I want to do is show you some papers and some research you might not be familiar with to kind of give a different perspective on it. And this is the paleoclimate perspective. So the long-term evolution of the climate itself with grasslands. And I advise you to become familiar with Gregory Ritalik at the University of Oregon. He does fantastic work on paleoclimate and paleosols, ancient soils. And look at the title of this paper, Global Cooling by Grassland Soils of the Geological Past and Near Future. How about that for a title? And this is from the abstract. So he talks about a type of soil called the mollisol. Well, the mollisol is the predominant soil under a grassland ecosystem. Global expansion of grasslands and the newly evolved carbon-rich soils, mollisols, over the past 40 million years have induced global cooling, may have induced global cooling and ushered in the Pleistocene glaciation, basically the ice ages. So he's basically saying the reason why we even have ice ages is because of all the carbon drawdown in mollisols over the last 40 million years. There was a profound drop in temperature and CO2. There are debates, of course, about what caused it, but his hypothesis is that it was the evolution of mollisols, and mollisols happened because of the evolution of ruminant ungulates. And then at the final part here, he says modern grassland agroecosystems are a potential carbon sink already under intensive human management, and carbon forming techniques may be useful in curbing anthropogenic global warming. So that's from 2013. And then here's also from Ritalik 2013. What you see here is the evolution over going back 50 million years now of the first ungulate ruminants, and then the evolution of the deep, rich soils, and of course the carbon drawdown that corresponded to that. Now, what's fascinating is because Australia separated from the larger continental mass before the evolution of ruminants and ungulates, it's sort of a fascinating case study, and he's showing here how profoundly different the carbon concentration is on the soils in Australia compared to similar areas in Africa compared to areas in Africa with the same rainfall. So you see the top graph is the soil carbon concentration in terms of kilograms per square meter for Africa by rainfall, and the bottom one is in Australia. And then I added this, so this is my add to his graph. I call it the ungulate ruminant value add, but that's the point he's making anyway, that because of that evolution of ruminants and ungulates, and then the grasses and the mollisols, you have this profound difference in the soil concentration of carbon. Now, but not only that, oh God, okay. You also have a profound difference of nitrogen as well. Now, let's talk about the modern practices to try to get these historic behavior in modern practice, this historic behavior of wild ruminant ungulates in practice with domestic animals. And this is generally just called regenerative grazing, but specifically it's called holistic planned grazing. And more recently in scientific literature, it's referred to as adaptive multipatic or AMP grazing. And the key citations here are Savory 1999, Savory and Butterfield 2016, and Teague 2016. And so here is what a natural multi-species dense herding in an African savanna safari looks like, and we're trying to use livestock now, or those practices are trying to use livestock as a proxy for this. And then here's an example from Africa. So many of these pictures I took myself, by the way. I've been going all over the world to visit these sites. Again, you see a multi-species herd, densely packed, moving according to a plan that is optimal for the conditions. And then one of the elements of this practice will be what's called multipatic. That was the term that Teague used. And so here's an example of very specific paddocks. You want to have as many as possible and as small as possible. The idea is just to keep the animals together in a close herd and to keep them moving and to have plenty of time for grass recovery. This is a project that I have worked on personally. This is me. So I have a stake in the game here. I'm biased, I believe, in a good way, because I've been to these places and I've seen the results myself. The top left is how this place looked in 2004. This is in Zimbabwe. And then you can see about 10 years of restoration. And then there's me, and I'm standing next to a grass called Panica maximum. That grass can only exist in optimal conditions. Okay, this is in the Karoo region of South Africa. You can see on the right, there's no grass at all. There's not a single blade of grass. That's all woody shrub. And then you see on the left, it's predominantly grass, but some of the woody shrub remains, but it will eventually give way to all grass. And of course, the soil will be greatly improved, the erosion will be reduced, etc. So there's some sort of problem with me advancing the slides. Okay, this is the same spot on Google Earth. It's literally visible from space. And I can give you the coordinates to this. Now what we're gonna do is look at 4 case studies, and I'll just try to go through them fairly quickly. So what I showed you before, I guess, is anecdotal. These are now case studies that are published in peer-reviewed literature. Here they are, and I'll I can provide all the links to these papers. We'll just very quickly go through them. This is where they are, and then this is the carbon that's sequestered per hectare. So 3.59 tons of carbon per hectare per year, 2.29, 2.1, and 3. So 4 case studies now in peer-reviewed literature with numbers totaling, averaging around 2.7 megagrams per hectare per year. So here's one of the case studies. This is in Georgia, which is not the country of Georgia, the state of Georgia in the United States. It's a high rainfall area. This is what's called a chronosequence. So there were a bunch of plots which were under this type of management for different amounts of time, depending on when they were brought into that management. It wasn't the sampling wasn't done over time. The sampling was done at the same time, but the plots were themselves representative of areas which had been under this type of management for different amounts of time. So when it says 1 to 3 years, 3 years plus, it means the amount of time that it's under that management. And this is referred to as a multi-species pastured livestock system. And just basically what's going on here is that this is a typical sort of starting point. Unfortunately, it's like this now in most of the United States and probably most of the world. The land is just completely depleted. And without irrigation and fertilizer, there's just nothing left. And a typical commercial grain, commodity crop agriculture, in this area, it's corn, cotton, and peanuts. And then to begin the restoration with hay baling. I don't know if you can tell, but these are actual bales of hay which are put out just to kind of jumpstart it and get the animals on there. And then these are chickens. And then eventually, as it gets better, you have the animals together. And then eventually it gets much better. And now these are actually swine grazing in the forest. And then you have the cows and the chickens together. And this would be a moving paddock. So they'd be here, then here, then here, that type of thing. So here's the actual pictures. So here's a typical sort of year zero plot. It's like this all over. Then this one here, this is your sort of intermediary. And then this is here. So this would be a plot that's been under this management for, 10 years plus. So the ultimate transition is from this one to this one. And this is sort of an intermediary. And then here's the data of megagrams per hectare. And the average is 2.29 megagrams per hectare per year. Again, this is called a chronosequence. So the plots are all existing together and they're going to different plots. That's why year 20 is actually slightly less than year 18, not because it went down, because it's literally a different plot or a different spot. So that graph, may have gone like that, but the cumulative graph is represented by this accrual rate.
But we have 5 minutes left if we want to answer some question. Sorry.
I always go over. Oh, well. So just really quickly then, here's the soil organic matter increasing from 1.1 to 5.2% SOM. That's quite a significant increase. And here's another case study. This one is in Argentina. The paper's in Spanish, but the abstract is in English, and all of the tables and illustrations also have an English description, but basically you can figure out this is 2.1 tons per hectare per year over a 4-year period. I don't know what's going on with the advancing. Is not advancing right. Okay, so here's pictures from the field. your typical 30 centimeter soil sample. Now, relevant to the previous conversation that we were having, this is in Spanish. This basically corresponds to animal density, or stocking rate. EV, the V is vaca for cow, and E is equivalent, cow equivalent. It's basically a stocking rate data. And what you see here is the profound increase, almost a 5-fold increase in the stocking rate. And you see, this is a key point because this happens all the time in these regenerative systems. The number of animals goes up. And so the whole notion that we need to reduce cows is miscast, in my opinion, because it's based on the wrong model of grazing. When you do the right model of grazing, you can actually support more cows and be sequestering carbon at the same time. Well, that's the... I'll just really quickly show you everything. I mean, there's more data on... There was one more paper I didn't have a chance to get to, but you get the point. Here is the summary table of the 4 papers, and this picture, I just like to show it. It says Hope for the Future. This is the son of my colleague in Kenya who's doing this type of practice, and I call it Hope for the Future. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and very, very interesting presentation, and there's a lot of feedback already in the chat. We have some minutes left, and I understood that we could also share your presentation so that people could deeper dive in the presentation and the data. There was a question from one of my colleagues. Rolf said he thinks that 2 ton carbon per hectare per year. Rolf, maybe you could ask your question. I saw you there are several input from you.
Yeah, thanks, Martina. But I said I don't want to spoil the good vibes and the good intentions. But I've done this was part of my science when I was still working as a scientist, and we've gone through data sets and sequestration rates from the front to the back and forth, and usually it turns out there's methodological uncertainties, and then there's problems with sampling, bulk density changes, soil bulk density, and that's why I would be very, very careful to believe data that come up with sequestration rates above 2 tons. At least maybe you have this in the first 1 or 2 years, maybe, but not long term. I would doubt that very much. And we can go into, and if you want to go back to the regression equation that I criticized, this is a weak regression, sorry to say. But I don't mean to spoil it. I mean, I don't want to throw the baby with the bath, but we need to be careful with the expectations that we raise when it comes to sequestration rates in these ecosystems.
Okay, before Seth answered, there is another question from James. James Bullock?
Yes, hi there. Yes, I guess it's...
To ask Tent to answer the question, and then we are unfortunately already at the end. So over to you, James.
Yes, it's a very quick one. I think with this and some of the other talks, I put in the chat that we're talking about carbon sequestration in the soil, but obviously what most people worry about with grasslands, especially livestock systems, is the greenhouse gas emissions from the livestock themselves. I noticed that paper you shared has something about that, but I wonder if you had some thoughts about bringing methane, etc., emissions into the equation.
Yeah, my apologies for going over. I'm afraid that always happens, but if I could just quickly share one of the slides I didn't get a chance to get to, unfortunately. I'll just very, very quickly share this again. PowerPoint. Here we go. Yeah. This is from Stanley 2018. So this was a life cycle assessment which did account for methane. And so you see it says without soil sea flux, and this one says with soil sea flux. And then AMP refers to the adaptive multipatic grazing. And then FL refers to feedlot. So a typical grain finishing operation. And when you don't consider the sea flux with the sequestration, then yes, there's a net positive here. So this is kilogram CO2 equivalent per carcass weight. This is sort of a standard metric in this field, the greenhouse gas equivalent per carcass weight. But when you include the sea flux, it's negative. You actually have a drawdown. Now, this is including the methane. So the methane calculations are done according to IPCC 2016 Tier 2 on how you're supposed to account for that. And I should note that even that is antiquated, because now that we have GWP star, it actually will favor much more so in this case for the AMP. So at any rate, even with the methane accounted for, even with the old way of doing it, you're still having a net drawdown here. So at any rate, this paper at least does account for that question. The paper I'm referring to now is this one, Impacts of Soil Carbon Sequestration on Life Cycle Greenhouse Gas Emissions in Midwest USA Beef Finishing Systems. This is Stanley 2018, and I will provide the links to all these papers.
Thanks, Seth. And unfortunately, we are at the end, but we are not at the end of this discussion. I think this is very important, and it's a discussion we really want to carry on over the next sessions also. And to really have a deeper dive, we will share the presentation, and we will also try to capture one of the questions we had in the chat. Also, maybe interesting for you, Seth, to see the reactions on the PowerPoint, also from the previous presentations from the other participants. We are at the end of our session. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank for the engaged discussion in the chat. And I hope to see you in 4 weeks. We plan to have the next meeting after the Easter holiday at the end of April. We will continue with the discussion, and I think it's very important also in context with all the policies going on at the moment, and hope to see you. And if you have any interesting publication papers, please share with us. We will always upload on our webpage, the global webpage dialogue platform, and try to share with you. And thanks for all the presenters. Thanks for being here, and thanks for the great input. Have a nice day, evening. And
Martina, just before you go, can you save the chat? Because that's a valuable asset. I don't want that to get lost when you close the system.
Chat is saved and everything recorded. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you, Martina. Thank you all.